It's 11 p.m. You're exhausted. Your phone lights up. It's your friend having a crisis. Again. You answer. You always answer. An hour later, you've talked them through their anxiety, their relationship problem, their work drama. They feel better. You feel drained. You hang up and realize something. When was the last time they asked how you were doing? When was the last time anyone did? You're not unlucky with friends. You're not just a good listener. There's a psychological pattern at work. And it's not protecting you. It's trapping you. In the next 11 minutes, you're going to understand why you became the therapist friend, what you're actually getting from this role that keeps you trapped in it, and why the people in your life will never see you the way you see them. This isn't about boundary setting advice you've already heard. This is about the hidden psychological contract you signed without realizing it. And why breaking it feels impossible. Maya has 5 close friends. Every single one calls her when they're in crisis. Breakups. Family drama. Career anxiety. She's there for all of it. She cancels plans. Stays up late. Gives thoughtful advice. Last month, Maya's mom was diagnosed with cancer. She texted her friend group. 3 people responded with, "I'm sorry, that's tough," and never followed up. One person asked how she was doing once, then immediately shifted the conversation back to her own problems. Maya felt hurt, but not surprised. Because somewhere deep down, she already knew. These people don't see her as someone who has problems. They see her as someone who solves them. This is the emotional utility trap. And it's not an accident. Here's the mechanism. When you consistently show up as emotionally stable, insightful, and available, people develop what psychologists call a functional schema of you. A schema is a mental shortcut, a way the brain categorizes people to predict their behavior. Your friends' brains have categorized you as the helper. Every interaction reinforces this. They have a problem, you provide support, they feel better. Pattern recognized. Schema solidified. But here's the dark part. Once someone has a functional schema of you, their brain actively resists information that contradicts it. This is called schema maintenance bias. When you express a need, their brain experiences cognitive dissonance. Maya doesn't have problems, Maya solves problems. So they minimize it. Change the subject. Forget to follow up. Not because they're malicious, but because acknowledging your pain would require them to rebuild their entire mental model of who you are. And people don't rebuild. They maintain. Because maintaining is easier. You've become functionally one-dimensional. Not because you are, but because they need you to be. Strategic response. Stop being available for everyone's crisis. Not as punishment, but as information. The next time someone calls with an emergency that isn't actually an emergency, say, "I can't talk right now, but I can call you tomorrow." Then don't explain. Don't apologize. Just hold the boundary. Watch what happens. Some people will respect it and call you tomorrow. These are real friends who can adapt their schema. Others will get upset. Guilt you. Say you're being cold. These people never saw you as a full person. They saw you as a function. And the moment you stop performing that function, they'll either leave or try to manipulate you back into role. Let them leave. You're not losing friends. You're revealing who was never actually there. But here's what nobody tells you. You're not just a victim in this dynamic. There's a reason you chose this role. And it's darker than you think. Jason never talks about his own anxiety. But he's an expert on everyone else's. His roommate is depressed. Jason researches treatment options. His sister is in a toxic relationship. Jason has a 3-point exit strategy. His own life? Stagnant job he hates. No romantic relationship for 3 years. Crippling fear of failure that keeps him from pursuing anything he actually wants. But as long as he's solving other people's problems, he doesn't have to face his own. This is vicarious control. And it's the hidden payoff that keeps you in the therapist role. Here's the psychological mechanism. When your own life feels chaotic or unchangeable, helping others creates an illusion of agency. You can't fix your depression, but you can fix your friend's relationship. You can't escape your dead-end job, but you can give your coworker career advice that actually works. Psychologists call this displacement. You're redirecting the energy that should go towards solving your problems into solving everyone else's. Not consciously, but functionally. And here's why it's so seductive. It works. When you help someone, you get immediate validation. They thank you. They tell you you're amazing. You feel competent. Valuable. Like you have your shit together. Your own problems don't give you that. Your problems just make you feel inadequate. So you avoid them by staying busy with everyone else's chaos. But there's a deeper, darker layer. By positioning yourself as the stable one, the wise one, the one who has it figured out, you're protecting yourself from the vulnerability of being seen as broken. If you never share your struggles, no one can judge them. If you never ask for help, no one can fail you. If you never admit you're drowning, you never have to watch people swim away. You're not just helping. You're hiding. Strategic response. Deliberately share something you're struggling with to someone you've helped. Not a crisis. Just a genuine, unresolved problem. Then watch your own resistance. Notice how uncomfortable it feels. How you want to minimize it. How you're tempted to immediately pivot to asking about them. That discomfort is the real problem. You've built an identity around being the one who doesn't need help. Dismantling that identity feels like death. But it's not death. It's evolution. Start small. I've been feeling really anxious about work lately. Don't fix it. Don't wrap it up with a lesson. Just leave it there. Unresolved. And see who stays. But there's one more reason you can't stop. And it connects to something that happened long before you had friends. Emma grew up with a depressed mother. From age 8, Emma learned to read her mom's moods. Come home from school and assess, is mom functional today or is mom in bed? When mom was in bed, Emma became small. Helpful. She made dinner for her younger siblings. Did homework quietly. Didn't ask for anything. Because asking for things made mom worse. The only time Emma felt secure was when she was taking care of everyone. It meant she was valuable. It meant she wouldn't be abandoned. Now Emma is 32. Her mom is stable. But Emma still operates from the same programming. Your worth is determined by how much you can carry for other people. This is the childhood currency. And it's the deepest root of the therapist-friend pattern. Children are survival computers. They're constantly calculating, what behaviors keep me safe? What behaviors get me love? What behaviors prevent abandonment? If you grew up in a household where emotional caretaking was required, whether because a parent was depressed, addicted, narcissistic, or just emotionally immature, you learned a crucial equation: my needs equals burden. Their needs equals my purpose. You learned that love isn't given freely. It's earned through service. That connection isn't about mutual exchange. It's about what you can provide. And here's the neurological imprint: this pattern gets encoded in your attachment system during your most formative years. Your brain literally wires itself around the belief that your value comes from your utility. So now, as an adult, you don't consciously choose to be the therapist friend. You're magnetically drawn to people who need fixing because that's the only form of connection your nervous system recognizes as safe. Reciprocal relationships feel foreign. Uncomfortable. Even threatening. Because if someone doesn't need you, what's keeping them around? Strategic response. This one is harder because it's not about behavior. It's about belief. You need to identify the core belief: if I'm not useful, I'm not lovable. Then you need to test it. Find one person who you haven't helped extensively. Someone who likes you just for you. And pay attention to that relationship. Notice that it exists. That they stay even when you're not solving their problems. That the relationship might actually be less exhausting. Your childhood taught you that love is conditional. You need adult experiences that prove it's not. You can't think your way out of this. You have to experience relationships that operate differently. Start with one person. Just one. Where you're not the helper. And let that relationship be evidence against the lie you've been carrying. Liam knows everything about his friends. Their trauma. Their fears. Their secrets. They tell him he's their closest friend. The one they trust most. But Liam realizes something devastating. These people know nothing about him. Not because he hides intentionally, but because they never ask. And when he tries to share, their eyes glaze over. They change the subject. They check their phone. He thought he was building intimacy. But he was building something else entirely. Dependency. This is the intimacy paradox. The more you know about someone without them knowing you, the less intimate the relationship actually is. Real intimacy is bidirectional. It's vulnerability exchanged. Risk shared. It's me showing you my wounds and you showing me yours, and both of us staying. But what you've built is a one-way mirror. They're vulnerable with you while you remain hidden. They think this is intimacy because they feel known. But you're not known at all. Psychologically, this creates what's called a complementary relationship. One person is always the helper, one is always helped. And complementary relationships are inherently unstable and unfulfilling. Because the helper never gets their needs met. And the helped never has to develop their own emotional regulation. It's a parent-child dynamic, not a friendship. And here's the cruelest part: the more you help them, the less capable they become of helping you. You've trained them that you're the strong one. They've internalized that they're the broken one. The roles are set. Strategic response. Stop collecting people's secrets. Start enforcing reciprocity. When someone unloads on you for 30 minutes, interrupt and say, "I want to hear this. But I also need to share something. Can we make this a conversation instead of a therapy session?" If they can't handle that, if they get defensive or shut down, you have critical information: this person doesn't want a friend. They want an emotional service provider. And you can't afford to be that anymore. Here's the truth about being the therapist friend. It's not generosity. It's a defense mechanism. You give and give and give because somewhere in your nervous system, you learned that's the only way to be worth keeping. That if you stop being useful, people will leave. That your needs are too much. That being broken is unacceptable. So you became the person who holds everyone else's pain. Because as long as you're carrying theirs, you don't have to look at your own. But you're not actually connecting. You're performing. And performance isn't intimacy. It's protection. The people who only want you when you're helping them were never your friends. They were your audience. And you've been auditioning for love your entire life. Real friendship doesn't require you to be invincible. Real love doesn't demand that you hide your struggles. Real connection happens when two people see each other fully, not just the strong parts, not just the helper parts, but the messy, complicated, sometimes falling apart parts. You think letting people see you that way will make them leave. But here's what actually happens: the ones who leave were never really there. And the ones who stay? Those are your people. You don't need to stop caring. You need to stop disappearing while you do it. The role you've been playing kept you safe when you were small and powerless. But you're not small anymore. And the role that once protected you is now imprisoning you. You're allowed to be the friend who needs help. You're allowed to have a crisis at 11 p.m. You're allowed to be seen as something other than strong. You're allowed to stop being the therapist and just be the friend.